Okay, so this week's Torah portion is Pekudei. Oh, good morning, Moshe. Just in time. So this week we finish off the last portion of the book of Shemos, the second book of the Torah, and it deals with the continuation of last week. In fact, when it's not a leap year, this week and last week's Torah portions are combined as a double portion. But this year, since it's a leap year, so it's split. And it deals with the final details of the construction of the tabernacle in the desert, the sanctuary that they built in the desert. And the final thing is when they actually built it, and God's presence rested on the Jewish people. And then at the very end, it deals with their travels afterwards. Okay, so that's how the Torah portion ends off, with their traveling, and that's what this focus of this sikha is about, is the very end of their travels, and it connects it to the very beginning of the portion, because everything in the beginning is connected with the very end. So that's what this sikha is going to be explaining, the connection of the beginning to the end of this of the whole book of Shemos. Okay, so let's get started.
Moshe, let Moshe start.
Moshe, you were nominated.
What's the name of it?
Oh, to read?
Yeah, we're doing.
Okay, where I just pulled up my thing. Which one are we in?
Sikha 3.
Sikha 3.
Yeah.
All right. Leah.
Have it? Yeah.
The same height as the courtyard curtain.
Oh, you're on the group, right? On the WhatsApp group.
I don't think so.
No, I gotta add you.
I thought I don't know.
Okay, so let
Maybe
me.
because you said once before.
Okay, let me
Sizing up the curtains.
No.
Non
That's
sequitur.
number one.
The Sikha 3 is counting the infinite net sequitur. What does that mean? Non sequitur.
It makes no sense.
Oh, okay.
All right, let me go back and change. I was in the wrong. So I'm at Chelik 16 by Hekel, by Hekel Sikha 2. No,
Sikha 3.
Sikha 3.
that's what I was on.
You got it now?
Okay. And the first says sizing up the curtains, the same height as the courtyard curtains. Are we in Vayakel?
Non sequitur.
No, we're in Pekudei.
Yeah, so I thought, okay. I don't know why it came up that way. Let me see if I can get there.
He ain't gonna add you to the group.
What is non sequitur?
You just got it, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I can add you to the group also, so that way you'll be.
Let me see here. I gotta see what.
Okay, Pekudei, Sikha 3. Okay, here we go. Got it.
Okay, yeah.
Non sequitur. The Torah describes in detail how the Mishkan was built and then how the Shekhinah came to rest in the Mishkan. The cloud covered the tent of meeting and the glory of Hashem filled the Mishkan. The indwelling of the Shekhinah was so intense that Moshe was not able to come to the tent of meeting, for the cloud rested upon it and Hashem's glory filled the Mishkan. Next, the Torah relates that when the cloud rose from above the Mishkan, the children of Israel would travel on all of their journeys. If the cloud did not rise, they would not travel until the day it rose. We need to clarify. At first blush, these final two verses belong thematically to the Torah section in Parshas Behalosecha, describing the Jews' journeys in the desert. In fact, the gist of these verses is actually repeated there at great length. But what relevance do the steps of their travels, when the cloud rose, the children of Israel would travel, if the cloud did not rise, they would not travel, have with the balance of the subject matter of this parsha, which is focused exclusively on the Shekhinah coming to rest in the Mishkan. Seforno explains that the passage, quote, when the cloud rose from above the Mishkan, the children of Israel would travel, end quote, illustrates and informs us of the constancy of the Shekhinah's presence in the Mishkan, to the extent that the Shekhinah would never leave the tent of meeting until they had to travel.
So in other words,
However,
the focus of this Torah portion is about the Mishkan, the building of the tabernacle, and the fact that God's presence rested in the tabernacle, which that's the whole purpose. And in continuation with that theme, it tells us how consistent it was that there was always wherever they traveled. And that's how the final verses come in.
However, Seforno's explanation is not smooth. From its diction, it is clear that this passage is simply relating the travel routine of the Jewish nation. As the Midrash puts it, this is the account of their travels. What is the connection between the account of their travels, which belongs and is detailed at length in Parshas Beha'alot, and the account of the building of the Mishkan and Shekhinah coming to rest in it? The question is even stronger, according to the exposition of our sages, that the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, Hashem called to Moshe.
Sefer Vayikra is the third book of the Torah, which we're starting to read next week.
Hashem called to Moshe is a continuation of the earlier passage, which precedes the verse, when the cloud rose. Moshe was not able to come to the tent of meeting. According to this exposition, by juxtaposing these passages, the Torah teaches that Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting until Hashem called to him. Hashem's calling allowed Moshe to enter the tent of meeting. It turns out that the Torah interrupts the sequence of passages. Moshe was not able, and Hashem called to Moshe with an unrelated topic, a brief of the travels, which seems to be unrelated to the subject of the Mishkan.
Okay, so basically we have one big question over here. What are these last two verses of this Torah portion doing, which is really the completion of the entire book? The whole portion is all about the construction of the tabernacle, and the last two verses talk about the clouds and the travels of the Jews, which has nothing to do with the construction of the tabernacle. Not only that, but the next week's Torah portion, which is the beginning of the third book, comes a continuation to right before these two verses. So these two verses are like stuck in the middle, interrupting the flow of the passage. So we have to understand what the context of the placement of these verses. Okay, who wants to read chapter 2?
I do, please.
Okay, Joey.
The connection. Everything in Torah is precise, since the Midrash says that Hashem called to Moshe, beginning of Sefer Vayikra, continues with the topic of the end of our Parsha and Sefer Shemas. Moshe was not able to come. Clearly, there must be a correlation between the content of the two parshas, of which these verses are a component. In other words, Sefer Vayikra, whose theme is sacrifices, continues not just the account of the construction and assembly of the Mishkan, where the sacrifices were brought, but also continues the detailed description of how the Shekhinah came to dwell in the Mishkan, as is recounted in our Parsha, particularly since the detailed description comes at the end of our Parsha. This is also the reason that following the verse, Moshe was not able to come. The Torah interrupts, giving an account of the journeys of the Jews. Their journeys are correlated to when the cloud rose from above the Mishkan, the Shekinah departing from the Mishkan, because the matter of the sacrifices is linked, not so much with the Shekinah coming to rest in the Mishkan, but specifically with the fact that as a result of a Jew's journey, as it says, on all of their journeys, there had to be a departure from the Shekinah, as well as will be elaborated in section 8.
So in other words, we just laid the foundation of the answer. We didn't explain the answer yet, but the answer is going to be because this theme of the traveling Jews, the Shekhinah departing, and that was the symbol of travel. That's what happened when the cloud was resting, that's when it's time to stop and set up camp. When the cloud moved, time to move. And that's how they traveled for the 40 days in the desert. So this idea of the cloud departing, the Shekhinah departing, and the Jews traveling, somehow that is the link of this whole book of the Torah and next book of the Torah about the sacrifices. And this is the key to, it's not an interruption, but it's actually that is the connection. So we have to understand how that's connected.
Glue that puts it all together.
Okay.
You say that this non sequitur that he's calling it is ties Baker with Shimon? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this
Really?
is
Okay.
the main theme of the second of this week's portion is about the construction of the
Right,
tabernacle. Next week's portion in the third book is about the sacrifices. So to connect those two, the whole idea of the purpose of the temple has to do with the departure of the Shekhinah and the Jews traveling.
Okay.
So we have to understand. We didn't explain that, but that's going to be the key.
It's gonna be a fun one.
But before we get there, we're now going to preface
Seen that one from a mile away.
with something else. Maybe we'll do one more, or we got to go. Should we stop over here? Maybe we'll
I
stop
gotta go.
over here.
That's your boys.
Go.
Mark just made some fresh cocoa.
Oh, you're making okay. So maybe we'll do one more, and then we'll stop. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So who wants to read chapter 3?
I can do it. Yes.
Okay.
So this is the beginning and the end. We can understand this better by prefacing with an explanation of the connection between the end of Shemais and its beginning in accordance to the principle. The end is wedged in the beginning, and the beginning in the end.
Let me just say, in Judaism, the everything is a circle. So the beginning and the end are always connected. That's why on Simchas Torah, when we finish the Torah, we right away start the beginning of the next of the Torah.
So it's never broken.
It's never broken, and it's more like a spiral. In other words, when we complete a circle, and now we're on a higher level, so we're immediately continuing the next part of the circle, because it's not an end, but the end is the beginning of the next stage. So it's always interconnected. So everything in Torah, whenever we make, let's say, a finishing a tractate of a Talmud, so the Rebbe would explain how the end of the tractate is connected to the beginning of the tractate. And the same theme over here is the end of the book is connected to the beginning of the book.
Okay.
In this case, it's the beginning of
The
Baker.
No. That we're going to get back to that.
Oh, okay.
Now we're prefacing
Now we-
how the end of the book of Shemos, which is this book, this parsha is the end of Shemos, connects with the beginning of Shemos. Yeah.
Okay.
And now I seem to have lost track here. Oh, and
This connection
then
in chapter 3,
I'm still in chapter 3. Yes.
first paragraph.
First paragraph. Or the beginning and the end. This connection is also expressed by the names of the first and last parshios of Sefer Shemais, in which pertain to the topic of counting. Shemais, the name of the first parsha literally means, as Rashi explains, although the Torah counted them, the children of Yaakov, when they descended to Egypt, the Torah counted them again to make known how precious they are to Hashem, that they are compared to the stars.
So when they translate it, they say the second book of the Torah is called Exodus, but in Hebrew, it's Shemos, which means names. And that's because it starts off with the counting of the children of Jacob. And even though we already counted them before, the Torah already mentioned who they are. Why is the Torah counting them again? To show how precious they are. Something that's precious, you count over and over again.
Mhm.
So this idea of counting shows on its preciousness.
Okay. Pekudei, the name of the last parsha, literally accounting, refers to the accounting of the weights of contributions to the Mishkan and all its utensils for all of its work. The theme of Sefer Shemos is the redemption of the Jewish people from Egypt. So in light of this redemption, must be correlated to counting, which connects the beginning of the book to its end. This is puzzling. Aren't counting and redemption complete opposites? Counting something proves that what was counted is limited in quantity, which the count underscores. So in contrast, genuine redemption entails beyond moving constriction, exile, and limitations.
So are we being bounded and limited or going beyond our limitations? Redemption is going beyond limitations, being free. And counting is limiting it to whatever the finite counting number is.
Yeah.
So how are these two themes connected? It's seemingly opposites.
Interesting. This paradox can also be found at the beginning of the Sefer itself. The name of the first parsha, which alludes to the content of the entire parsha, is Shemos, which alludes to the restricted count of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. This is followed immediately by the verse, the children of Israel were fruitful, teemed, increased, and became very strong, very, very much, which indicates that an increase that was completely beyond the norm. Since this verse is also in the Parshas Shemos, we must conclude that fruitful, teemed, very, very much is also included in the counting.
It says that they had 6 babies at one time, 6 tuplets. So that's
Like every
so-
month or so, right?
So we're talking about being fruitful very, very much. That would definitely be considered that.
Yeah.
How many
There
diapers?
you go. Did they even
Why
have
they let them, they were raised in the reeds. That's how many diapers.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why they put them in the river.
That's just how they do it. It's super clean, no wipes or anything.
it?
So,
Jack was there.
Yeah, you know.
so the name of the parsha of counting is right away a paradox because it deals with the seemingly greatness of how many children they had. What's the word? Proliferation or something like that.
Proliferation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Prolific.
many,
Okay.
many.
Very good.
Yeah. So at the end of the Sefer of Shemos, we find a similar paradox. The accountings of the Mishkan exemplify, as explained, counting and constraint of the Mishkan's utensils, etc., which were counted and limited. However, the end of the Parshas Pekudei says that Moshe was not able to enter the tent of meeting, for the cloud rested upon it. When the Shekhinah rested in the Mishkan, the indwelling was unrestricted. I don't get that part, but okay.
It was such a powerful revelation that it was too much for Moshe to handle. So when the cloud was there, nobody, not even Moshe, could enter the tent of meeting because it was like an infinite, unbridled, it was too much.
Okay. So when the Shekhinah rested in the Mishkan, the indwelling was unrestricted. So Moshe was not able to come to the tent of meeting. The indwelling of the Shekhinah in the Mishkan was so sublime that even Moshe, the paragon of humanity, was unable to enter.
Okay, so now we're prefacing our first question about how the last verses about the travelings in the desert, why that's coming in over here. We're prefacing that with another question of how the beginning ties in with the end. And the beginning and the end, they both have to do with counting, but they also have to do with redemption. And how does that work together? Because counting is limited, redemption is infinite. And this paradox we find also both in the beginning and the end, we have this paradox. In the beginning of the book, we have the paradox because on one hand, it's about redemption, but on the other hand, on one hand, it's about counting them because we're counting their names again. And on the other hand, we see how many babies they had. And it was so much, and how does that fit together? And in the end, we see that it's again counting the Pekudei, the counting the utensils. And on the other hand, we have that there was an unrestricted, unbridled revelation from God that was too intense for even Moshe to handle. So again, we have this paradox. We're dealing with finite or infinite. How does that come together? So when we explain the answer to that, it will help us explain the answer to the first question. Okay, we'll stop over here.